Hello everyone, welcome back to session 4, and in today's session we're going to do some fun things. We're going to do a glaze to make most of the fawn's face a little bit yellower because it's leaning a bit red right now. So I'm going to show you how you can kind of change the whole color of an area by glazing on over your dry painting with color. And we're going to do yellow for this session, and then we will do some dry brush techniques. We'll let that yellow glaze dry, and then we'll do some dry brush to get some of that coarse, more dark fur that is on the fawn's face. And then we will start mixing paint for the background, and we will do the background in the next session. I don't want to rush it, and I only want to keep these sessions 20 minutes long. So let's get started. I think what I need now is to add back in some warmth. There's a lot of warmth here, a lot of yellows. So I'm going to go in with some strong leaning yellow here with my 3/4 oval. And this is what we would call a glaze. This is a perfect example of what I'm about to do of a glaze. This is all perfectly dry. And I'm going to clean out my yellow. It's pretty red leaning right now. So clean that out in my dirty water. I have my dirty water right here, and then farther off I have my clean water, and I have to put it far away because when I'm painting quickly I'll forget and just get both of them dirty. That's a problem with me. Kind of like the running joke on watercolor forums that you always dip your brush in your tea or your wine. Preferably wine, I'm sure. And I'm just going to get my yellow a little dirty. I don't want it to be screaming yellow, so I'm just going to mix it with some of this junk on my palette, which is mostly burnt sienna and maybe a little ultramarine blue. I don't know, just to gray it down a little. And all this has warm undertones in here. And it's leaning pretty strongly red right now. So I'm just gonna fix that by going right up to the eye, kind of scrubbing at that edge to soften it while I'm there. I'm gonna scrub at that thick eye edge to soften all that. It looks very stuck on right now, which is fine, but over the bottom part of the ear. Get a little bit more tea consistency to up the yellow there. And then I'm just going to rinse out my brush and get it full of clean water and just go over some edges. Make sure I don't have any hard edges that are not desirable. This ear got really loose and I actually really like it. So anyway, that's what we just did. We put a glaze over all the warm areas, which is a large area. Actually, let's do a little warm glaze down here on his little fluff. And I'm gonna kind of loosen up the edges by just kind of pulling them out, because I want that to be soft fawn fur down there. We can let that dry. All right, in this next little section of painting, we're going to do some dry on dry painting to simulate some of those dark, coarse furs on the fawn's face. So what I want you to do is get your brush cleaned out, wring it out by squeezing all the extra water out of your brush. Here I'm squeezing it out on my paper towel. Then I dip just the tip in my brush. I make sure that I have just the right amount of water, which is barely any. So basically I'm rubbing my brush here on the palette with a damp brush to get very just barely wet paint in my brush, and then I'm splaying the bristles by pinching the bristles so they spread out kind of like a fan shape, kind of like a rake brush. And in fact, if you have a rake brush, you might want to play with a rake brush. Also, if you guys ended up getting a stencil brush like what I sent to my $18 and above Patreon students, you might have that in your arsenal. That also works really great for these kinds of fur textures where they're really coarse, like brindling on a brindle dog, or in this case with this deer has these dark, coarse furs that are perfect for doing dry brush. So dry brush technique is where you work on dry paper with just a damp brush, and it works great. If you have some paint mixed up on your palette, let that paint dry and then reactivate it with just a damp brush. You will have the perfect amount of paint in your brush to do this dark of dry brush technique. Of course, you can do lighter dry brush technique with less pigment in your brush, but here these furs are really dark chocolate brown. So I got this chocolate brown color by mixing ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I would say it's about half of each color in the mix to get this chocolate brown color. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue make this a beautiful chocolate brown. If you don't want to mix, use burnt umber. Burnt umber is the same exact color. So you can also do it that way. And I'm just using the tip of my brush most of the times. You can also use the side of your brush to scrape along the top of the paper. And in some areas, these fur textures actually have a direction. So just look at your reference photo for wherever you're painting, and if they're long, thin strokes, make a long, thin stroke. If there are a bunch of short ones, do kind of jabby brush strokes with the tip of your brush. And again, it works really best if you kind of splay out the bristles of your brush so that you get some interesting texture. You don't want to make each of your marks equally distant from each other and going in the right direction. That doesn't look natural. There's clumps of this dark fur, so just really look at your reference photo for whatever area you're painting and really scrutinize it and think about it instead of just painting what you think you see. Really look at those fur textures. Are they thick or thin? Do they have long contours, or is the whole clump in the shape of a triangle? Like this area I'm working on right now, the larger shape is kind of an oblong, wide triangle. So pay attention to that. There's a couple triangles of these dark, rough fur areas. And then over the nose, there are those arcs of the dark fur. So look for those shapes wherever you can and duplicate them as much as possible for a more realistic look. Here I'm going to go ahead and put in that ear, some of the ear color here. And I'm just carefully looking at my reference photo and painting the shape that I see, which is kind of a triangle shape. And getting the area that's hitting the white fur of the deer's face kind of jagged. So I'm trying to make that edge jagged so it looks like white fur up against the dark hair of the ear there. Adding a little bit of dry brush in that ear. Don't want to overdo it. I don't want to lose the magic dreaminess all that wet and wet painting got me. Adding a few little dark strokes here and there in the eye. Darkening my eyeliner since I have some really dark paint in my brush. And I'm just taking advantage of having dry paper and really thick paint in my brush to darken a few spots in the eye. Looking closely at my reference photo for wherever the darkest areas are in the eye. Using just the tip of my brush. Going back over that ear to redarken areas. Thinking. You can see I'm just looking at my painting, looking at my reference photo, and thinking. All right, next I'll do the nose. I'm getting a little bit more watery paint there, you'll notice, because I want this to be kind of a smooth area. It's all kind of a flat black, and I'm just looking carefully at the shape, relying on my drawing, but also relying on what my eye sees in the reference photo. And this is not an area of interest for me, so I'm not putting too much detail. I'm just putting the nose there, filling in that one solid dark shape. As you go towards the left of the painting, you could go a little bit more blue. I can kind of see that color gradient, and that always looks good to get an area like this, not one flat color, but go from brown to like a blue black at the very far left edge. I think that would be pretty. I didn't really do that. But if you want to up your game, you can do that. Just with each brush stroke as you moved left, add more ultramarine blue. I think that would be really pretty. But this is a mix between cream and milk consistency. And there I'm getting a little bit more watery brown over there, a little more burnt sienna on my brush, dipping some water, getting some water mixed into my burnt sienna. And while that bottom of the nose is wet, I'm attaching it. Do you see how I did that? I'm attaching it to the lighter brown fur of the lower lip so that it kind of attaches. You don't want things to look like cutouts, and one way to do that is attach body parts that aren't attached in the real world. Like his nose and his bottom lip obviously are not attached, but I attach them in my painting because if you look at the reference photo, the area underneath the nose just kind of blurs right into the upper lip in the reference photo because of the shadow. So you want to do that in your painting too. You want to create places of attachment so things look natural and they don't look like cutouts. So I painted the nose and the lower dark brown bottom lip part as if they were one piece of anatomy. I talk a lot about attachment in my paintings, and a lot of times I talk about attaching your animal to the background, but you can also attach disparate body parts to each other when the reference gives you that opportunity, and my reference gave me that opportunity to attach the lip to the nose. It just makes it look more natural and appealing. I think it will help to enter the phase of the painting where you balance the values out if I put the rest of the background in and also get this dark line I do intend to get. And notice what color this dark area is back here in the background. It's green, which is a complementary color to these reds and browns. They're on opposite sides of the color wheel, so all this green is really going to help make these reds vibrate. So we will definitely put that green in. It's really going to help this painting. So I am starting a new painting session. It's been a couple days since I worked on this, so I am going to activate my palette, and I will probably mix this green. I just prefer the look of a mixed green as opposed to a tube green, and so many of the tube greens are so ridiculous and hard to manage. Like sap green just makes a big mess. It's so staining. Viridian is really crazy staining from what I remember, and it's hard to control, kind of like phthalo. But when you mix an ultramarine blue with the aureolin, you get just these gorgeous greens, and you can really You can add yellow to make it a more yellow green, or add more blue to make it a more blue green, or add a little tiny bit of red to make it a grayed down green, which is probably what we'll do. For this cream consistency area that's so dark, I may actually get fresh tube paint on a separate palette to mix that. I think that's what I need to do. And you know what? We're going to use some green. Let's use some green gold. If you don't have green gold, do not worry. Just use your Holbein Aureolin. But look what a pretty mix that's just gorgeous. But yeah, I never have had a problem with paint unattaching from my palette until I did that hacks video where I talked about using gum arabic to reattach your paint, and now it happens to me all the time. But I think what I'm going to do is get a separate palette and get some tube paint for the cream consistency application. Oh, look, I got a spray, and who even cares because it's going to be loose. But if you don't like a mistake like this and it's still wet, just get it really wet and then dab it off. See, it stained a little bit, but it does not matter because this is all going to be so dark. I actually just bought some new French ultramarine, even though I still have plenty of Daniel Smith, because that Daniel Smith just has too sandy of looking granulation to me, and this Winsor and Newton ultramarine flocculates more than it looks sandy, which I think is stunning. I love that. So I'm going to put my Winsor and Newton French ultramarine on my little palette here that I'm going to get. I've run out of all my clean palettes, so I'm going to try using this. I've never tried this. It's just a styrofoam plate. It probably will bead up too much, but for cream consistency paint, it might not matter. Well, let's try it. So I'm going to get my French ultramarine, Winsor & Newton. I'm going to put a healthy little dollop because I don't want this to be really thick and gorgeous. I really do. And then I think I'll also use Winsor Green Gold. Again, you can use Holbein Aureolin. That will totally work. But I'm using this as my yellow. And I'm just putting a little. Well, maybe a little bit more. I'm going to get my brush really clean. Doesn't have to be too clean though, because let's just spray this paint. It really doesn't, it's not going to take a lot of water to get this to the thick cream consistency we want. And then that's really thick paint there, which is good. And then I'll clean off my brush over here on my palette, and maybe I'll end up using this little puddle of green gold that I'm making here. You can even just squeeze it back into my green gold. And then, so you see, I didn't use much water at all, just a few sprays, and that's almost still not cream consistency enough for what I need to do back here, but it'll be good for the underpainting. Because what we'll do first is paint with probably tea to milk consistency, and then drop in cream consistency while it's still all wet. But it's just French ultramarine, Winsor & Newton, you can't beat it. Okay, very thick paint there. So there we've got some paint prepared. Thank you so much for joining me for session 4. And in session 5, we're gonna paint the background, wet and wet, nice, soft, dreamy background. It's gonna be pretty. And we'll continue developing the complexity of the fur in the fawn's face. So I will see you in session 5.